There I am.
There you are. Hi, how are you?
Hi. Good. How are you?
I am good. So, you want to see if you can share?
Sure. Let me close out this stuff. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Excited. Got the
I'm excited too. I love any time that we get to help the squad with blue team things. So let's see.
so hopefully we see full screen slides.
Absolutely. Looks perfect.
Do y'all typically do a lot of blue team focused stuff, more red team?
We do, but that's only because I'm more red team myself. So, anything that I'm teaching are stuff that I know, and I don't know anything about blue team at all. So that's why I'm always excited, because I can at least give, something red team a go. But blue team is just like, I ain't got it. You know what you know, right?
Yeah. I feel like I've been doing it a bit, but I don't feel like I know it very well, so it's like I always want to learn it better. I love doing stuff like this. I feel like it helps me double check what I think I know. Let me just double check my real quick.
Mhm.
Got a 2-year-old that likes to wander in. Oh, it's
Aw, that sounds amazing.
cute.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited today because, as you guys know, I am always excited whenever we get to talk about blue team things with the squad, because I think that we need to have like well-rounded cybersecurity professionals. So, our guest today is remote phone on Twitter. His name is Jaime Flores. And he's going to be talking to us today about incident response in practice. So, Jaime, I'll turn it over to you so we can get started. I know folks are on their lunchtime now, so I want to be respectful of their time. And if you want to introduce yourself before you get started, please feel free.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, let's start out. Thank you. I am Jaime Flores, remote phone on Twitter, a couple other places. This talk is incident response in practice. Another way to think about it is putting the fun in fundamentals. So we're going to be talking about incident response and focusing on the incident response process. We're going to dig into an incident and apply the process to that incident. Wrap up and questions is how we'll close this out. A little bit about me. Currently, I'm engineering detections at GitHub. Previously, I was at Indeed and some other places doing security incident response and detection work. That's where my background is. I responded to a bunch of incidents on premise, in the cloud, all over the place, really, SaaS applications, Windows, Linux, Mac OS. So I've seen a wide variety of things, and I'm excited to share that kind of experience with y'all. I've got some certifications. Some are cool, some are pretty tough. And in my free time, I like to take pictures of birds and bugs, mostly ducks. I'm on Instagram, and that's mostly what you'll see there. But the focus today is on the fundamentals. I like to focus on the fundamentals, not because it's easy, but because it's so important. And you got to keep in mind, you don't get to pick the incidents you respond to. So when there's a security incident, you don't pick exactly how it's going to happen. You just have to respond to it. I think a solid and deep understanding of the fundamentals gets you ready to handle an incident any size, because following a standard structured process that keeps all your thoughts and your processes in order really helps you respond to an incident thoroughly and effectively, and avoid kind of letting the details of the incident get overwhelming. Let's talk about some terms so we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. An event is an observable activity on a network. So, that might be me SSH into a system, you RDPing into a system, making a connection in. It could be a user changing their password, anything that you can observe happening on a network, not necessarily good or bad. An incident is when that event becomes a violation of a security policy. So begs the question, what is a security policy? This is from NIST. Their definition is a statement of required protection for the information objects, kind of a abstract definition. But if you look at a security policy in practice, this one's Carnegie Mellon University's security policy. I'm not connected with them in any way. I just think they have a really, really good one. They say all data shall be protected in a manner that's considered reasonable and appropriate. And then they go on and define what reasonable and appropriate is later in the policy. They also say that individuals who are authorized to access data should adhere to appropriate roles and responsibilities. So a good way to think about that is if they're handling credit card data, there is a reasonable and appropriate way to handle that, which is very carefully and usually in adherence with like PCI standards, something like that. If they're handling something that's like a marketing material, like a pamphlet they want to print out and send, you want to handle that in a way where people can't change it or deface it in a way that's not appropriate. But you're definitely probably not protecting that at a level that you would protect credit card information. And then the other part about appropriate roles and responsibilities. So even if I am a system administrator with access to a system, and I have rights to access the database, for example, if that's not my job and I shouldn't be messing with database tables, I probably don't want to be logging in and doing that. So what is the incident response process? The incident response process is a structured, repeatable process for handling security incidents throughout their life cycle. So when this happens, you have kind of some steps you can follow, some big guidelines for you to pay attention to as you're working through an incident. What makes a good incident responder? So I like to think that everyone is on the incident response team. When something happens at a company or like an incident happens, everyone's working together to resolve it. You're going to be the expert on some things, but you can't be the expert at everything. There's just too much. There's not enough time in a day. None of us can be great at everything. And even if you are, you can't be everywhere at once. You're going to find that if you're working incidents or working incident response, working alongside those folks, sometimes incidents get too big and too complex for one person to be able to handle everything. And being able to delegate and team up with folks is important. Which is why I really like this example of an incident responder. This is called a T-shaped analyst. So if you have an incident responder, all of us are going to be strong at some things and weaker at others. So maybe this person is extremely strong at network forensics, but not so good at memory forensics or file system forensics. And if you team someone up with the opposite skills, then you have two people that can complement each other. Maybe this first person can get this stuff started and hand it off to the expert, or at least be aware and notify the expert when they need to be brought in. Having people with different complementary skills and working them together is going to be an important part of any incident response process. I'll kind of get into that, like what step that falls into, but this is just so important to be able to have a team of incident responders that can support people and know that you don't have to do everything yourself.
So quick question.
Sure.
So do you have to have a little bit of all of those things in order to be like a decent incident responder, or can you like get away with, hey, I'm really good with, maybe log analysis and malware triage and network forensics, but maybe I don't have any of those other pieces?
It's nice to have a little bit of all of them, but you definitely don't have to. You're going to find that it's almost like when you're doing log analysis, if you're looking at logs for a Linux system, it's almost impossible to know what you're looking at without having some understanding what's going on a Linux or Windows system, for example. So you tend to pick up other skills and tend to snowball stuff as you're working for things. My job, for example, I started off in the network operations center. So I was doing a lot of network, a lot of Linux stuff. And then we had Active Directory audits I was starting to get involved in. So, just some side work that I started to do helped me get good at Windows environments, helped me get good at user management, user audits, all that kind of stuff. And it was just like a skill that started to snowball. Like, I am not the Active Directory person. I'm not the primary person you want to call in for that kind of incident or anything like that. But I have some exposure to it, and I can tell, I can do the sniff test and see when something's up, usually at least. So no, you don't have to have them all. You tend to pick them up the longer you do this, though, and it's almost unavoidable to end up with some familiarity with them. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. So this is the incident response process. It's a 6-step process. This is actually a redraw of the SANS process. When they draw it in a circle. I like to do it in a line just because it's easier for us to talk about. But we think about it like this, but the incident response process often flows like this. So you have an incident, it has obviously a start and end, but as you take decisions and make choices within an incident, that's going to close off or open up certain paths for you. So for example, if you're doing an incident response, you decide you want to turn off a system that has malware on it. Well, you turn off the system, that means the malware can't run on that system, but it also means you can't see what it's doing. You have to take different steps to collect evidence from that system. All sorts of things change. So it's like a branching tree of possibilities. And thinking of an incident like this really helps you kind of realize that, like, you can't follow a simple checklist for some of this stuff. You have questions you're going to want to answer in an incident, but this stuff can get really complicated, and it's important to keep it sorted and organized. And following the incident response process at a fundamental level really helps you do that. Just a little bit about the SANS IR process. I like it because different places have different needs and standards, and responders need a clear policy and procedure to support them. It's very hard to do incident response when you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. So having a policy and procedure behind you really, really helps you understand what you're supposed to be doing. Some things are almost clearly always a security incident, even if it's not called out specifically in a policy. So, if you're running a shop that runs websites and someone is abusing your applications to run code they shouldn't, maybe that's not a good thing. That's probably obvious security incident. But if you run a service that's running code for people kind of as a service, like that's not necessarily a clear-cut security incident all the time. So it really depends on like what the business you're supporting is doing, what they're willing to accept, their accepted level of risk, and whether or not you're going to deal with that as a security incident. I think this process is effective, clear, and flexible enough to kind of fit in wherever you are and whatever kind of policy you're working with. So that's the one I tend to run with, but I've seen other ones in action that work just fine. So let's talk about the steps. We're going to use a specific example to talk about the steps. The first one is prepare. we're going to be preparing for a compromised account scenario. This is like a standard user account that got compromised. And sorry, there's a little bit of lag. I think I'm skipping the slides on accident. We should see. Here we go. So the preparation stuff, you're getting ready for an incident. You're training and you're practicing. To be prepared for a compromised account, can you identify the users? Do you know who they are? Do you know where they typically log in from? Are you logging this stuff? Do you know what permissions they have? Can you research that and investigate that? Do you know how to lock an account if it's compromised? You know how to reset passwords? Do you know the people that you can work with? Maybe it's not you directly, but it's the IT team. Do you have these relationships with the IT team to be able to run this stuff? All this stuff goes into incident preparation. And the way you prepare for that stuff is you write run books. Those run books are steps that you want to follow in an incident. And if you have run books and, I know that when the account's compromised, I need to take step A, B, and C. Can you automate them? So instead of like manually clicking through A, B, and C, you can run a script and it performs those actions for you, or you equip another team to run those scripts. Another part of preparation is just knowing your stuff's going to work. So if I go and run the password reset script, do I actually have permissions to run that? Am I resetting the right password in the right domain? All those kind of things kind of take into account here. So when you're preparing, that's really making sure that your incident response process is going to work when you apply it. A lot of people do tabletop exercises. That is kind of like mock incidents where you walk through the steps. You might execute some of the technical parts of the steps to make sure they work in practice. But really being prepared for an incident is probably one of the most important steps. The next step is identifying an incident. If something happens, are you able to identify it? Can you detect and identify an incident in a sea of events? There's a ton of SSH connections, a ton of RDP connections in normal business all the time. Can you find the bad ones? Can you receive a user report of suspicious logins, like those emails that come up that say your account logged into a suspicious place? Do people have somewhere to go with that? If you have like a security system that's monitoring this stuff, like a SIM, a security information event monitoring tool that's like watching all these logins and finding bad ones, are the alerts for these compromised accounts going to the right people? Is that going to an email box that no one's checking? Is that actually going to the incident response team or the people responsible for triaging those? Can you not only identify an incident, but make sure that the people who are responsible for calling an incident can see it? There's a bunch of tooling and process that supports this. We talked about the SIM. This is like, I'm not talking about any specific brand here, but some of the brand names here are like Splunk, Logarithm, tons of other security event monitoring systems like open source, vendor systems. Elasticsearch is another big one that I think someone had talked about previously on here. These are systems that are helping you identify security incidents because they collect all the data, they look at that data and find signs of that and bring that up to you. Threat hunting is another way where you proactively look for that data, find things that are hard to alert on, find things that are hard to make automated alerts and kind of bubble up and investigate the weird things to find incidents. There's also intrusion detection prevention systems. So these are systems that monitor network traffic to find signs of malicious activity and notify on it. And then there's stuff like antivirus and on and on and on, enterprise detection response, all these tools, just a ton of tooling available to support this. So if you think about all the stuff that we have, is try to think about the one that you think might find the most incidents. If you think about it, it's probably pretty easy to pick one off this list that maybe you've had the most experience with, or that you hear catching incidents, maybe threat hunting, because it happens a lot. But I went through the Verizon data breach report. If y'all haven't seen the Verizon data breach report, it's this awesome resource. The Verizon incident response team goes through incidents, says why they happen, how they happen, the circumstances around them, and a bunch of research around like what that means for trends in the industry. But they also release the raw data, and they release that data in a format that you can pull it off GitHub, you can do research on it, you can analyze it. So I took that data and I ran some Python on it to figure out what the most common method for detecting security incidents was according to that report. And this was kind of shocking, and it's a number that I come back to a lot. So there's all sorts of ways that security incidents are detected. The big chunk of unknown, incident response is about 4%. Network intrusions detection, maybe less than 1%, antivirus less than 1%. The big one at the bottom is reported by employees. So 56% of incidents that are detected, according to the Verizon data breach report, there's plenty of things to say about that data. Maybe it's not a perfect sampling. Maybe it's missing a bunch of important data. Maybe it's compiled in a way that's not, all sorts of criticisms we could make of it, but it's pretty good data, and it's probably some of the better data we have on this. So to think that more than half of incidents, according to some of the best data available, are reported by employees, like fundamentally as an incident responder, you need to have access to this information, and you need to be able to notify when someone reports an incident. So if there's anything fundamental to detect an incident, I think it's having your team in order to be able to get these reports and handle them and process them and deal with them in like a timely fashion, and make people feel appreciated when they do that, because it's really easy for someone to, feel insecure about submitting a report. Like, I don't know if this is something, like it seems weird, but I don't know if it's something. Should I say something? If they get a negative response when they submit that, you might not ever hear from them again. But if they feel supported, they feel enabled, they feel like even if it was nothing, it was good that they reported it, then there's a really good chance they're going to come back to you when they do find something. And that's just so fundamental to be able to detect incidents. So the next step, there's a line here. I don't know where that line came from, but we'll go on to the next one, the containment step. So containment is preventing the incident from getting any worse. This is where you might take steps to stop the bleeding, for example. So you're going to do things like lock the account, terminate sessions on the account, make sure that they can't log in or get anywhere else. You want to make sure you're identifying all actions taken by the account. Thank you. Where a new account's created, was new software installed? Does the account have permissions you want to revoke temporarily? So if you have an administrator account that maybe is compromised, can you remove those permissions so they're not an administrator in the short term while you investigate and understand the incident? This keeps the incident from getting any worse, because it's very difficult to be working an incident and find that incident has spread to other systems or other user accounts or anything when you're trying to contain and respond to that incident. So scoping the incident down, understanding how big that incident is, and taking action on that to prevent it from getting worse is so important. Once you've done that, you want to eradicate the incident. So eradication is preventing the incident from happening again, kicking out the attacker, removing their footholds. For a compromised account, that's going to be doing stuff like reset the password and make sure it's set to something strong. So, if this account was compromised because someone tried to log in over and over until they guess the password, they should have a password that you can't guess. Was multi-factor authentication turned on? If there was, it's extremely common to see exclusions of private account where like this account doesn't need MFA for whatever reason. Maybe someone never removed that exclusion, so that account only had single factor authentication. Can we turn MFA back on? Can we review the permissions? Does this person need to be an admin? Do they do admin work? Can we take that permission away or demote them to a regular user, or give them a more kind of like appropriate account within the middle? Maybe you don't need full admin. Maybe you need access on one or two systems. And setting up the account that way is a way to eradicate the incident, keep from happening again. So the attacker can't get in with the same password, they're not able to access the same account, they weren't able to install new software, all that stuff. They're not able to start the incident again. The next step is recovery. That's getting everybody back to work. When you're done with the incident, can the admin log in? Can they do their job? Do they need a replacement system? Do you have a process in place to get people replacement equipment if they get malware or something like that? Recovery, like incident response, is necessarily usually a disruptive activity on the network where things are stopped in order to get the incident handled. Whether it's, if it's not turning stuff off, it's getting people away from work so the incident can be responded to. So can you get everyone back to work as part of recovery? And then finally, lessons learned is taking the lessons that happened, things that caused the incident, and making sure they don't happen again. So that's going to be stuff like review MFA exclusions and policy globally. Are there anyone else who have MFA turned off because it's not convenient or whatever? Is there something we can fix fundamentally that helps us keep MFA on everywhere? Review user permissions. Do we have 150 domain admins? Like, do we need 150 domain admins? Can we get rid of that? And then, of course, doing things like implementing regular audits and permissions, and also focusing internally on the incident response team. We responded to this incident, but could we have done better? Did we miss a step? Do we have documentation that was out of date? Do we have automation we can build? Are there things we can improve on the team to learn from this incident to respond better? Because again, like these incidents get out of control very quickly. And if you have like a solid process, if you're making continual improvement, you're going to cut down on some of these options that you just like, some of these paths you just don't want to have to go down. So the better prepared you are, the better you can steer an incident in the direction that you want it to go and kind of have a controlled response to it. So what's the hardest part of the incident response process? I think it's lessons learned. It's so hard to take an incident and work through it and then make sure that lessons are learned and applied consistently. It's There's examples of that all over the place. I was looking for an example and very quickly found this is an article about the rise of ransomware. In this example, an organization was ransomware. They paid $9 million to decrypt the environment. They didn't eradicate, they didn't learn and apply the lessons, and they were ransomware again by the same actors. Like, this stuff isn't easy. It's not easy to kick someone out and apply these lessons and learn them. But there are probably some concrete steps they could have taken, especially if it's the same actors using similar techniques to get back in. There are things we can do to prevent these incidents happening again, because if you don't, it's going to get expensive and it's going to get disruptive. So it's very important for us to learn these lessons from the incident and apply them. So let's talk about an incident. I made this one up. It's really not that far-fetched, though. I've worked incidents and seen and heard about incidents very close to what we're talking about. I intentionally simplified it because, remember, we're talking about the fundamentals here. I don't want to get into all this, very complex stuff, and really want to talk about the fundamentals. There's also lots of ways to respond to this. There's lots of correct answers here. If we remember the branching tree, there's a lot of different things I could do. This is one particular path that I took. It's really easy to disagree with me and be right on it. But I think this is probably a pretty fair approach to what we're going to be talking about. So the scenario is you're woken up by a page. It's a possible security incident, and you join the conference call. An admin received a page for high CPU alert on the system, so the processor was spinning at 100%. Your company has deployed a fancy new application. This is a real profit maker for them. They're just taking the market by storm with it. This is the application. It is you can send it text and it displays it in a cool way. You can share it on social media. All your friends can see it. Super cool, super cutting edge application that you put into production. This is the alert that the administrator got. So at 11 p.m., they were paged by 11:07 p.m. They were paged by the ops alerts alias. They got high CPU usage on a system called Debian, and the value's at 100%. So they acknowledge the alert and start looking into it. They're poking around. They saw something suspicious, and they thought it might be worth calling a security incident. So what do we do first? You join the call. You're sleepy. You're still waking up. You went to bed real early. And first thing you want to do on every incident is take a deep breath, stay calm, and stay organized. An incident responder can make or break the response to an incident, even if they're not doing the technical work. Because if you show up and you're scrambled and you're not sure what to do and you're not sure where to start, where to orient people, it's very easy for the incident to get out of control and have boats go off in different directions that aren't productive to the incident. So being kind of a beacon of calm and organization is very important in an incident. You're going to want to ask some of these questions, like, what kind of architecture are we dealing with here? So this is the architecture, super simple, super straightforward. This is a single data center with one single web server, nothing fancy. It connects directly to the internet. Super straightforward. Data. There is not any data on here, fortunately. There's no credit card data, there's no PII, there's no EU data. We're not super worried about any of that stuff. That means the impact is mainly reputation. Remember, this is a cool app. This is like taking social media by storm. So this reputation damage that we have, if we have to take this off, or it's defaced or unavailable, is going to be a pretty big deal. Now we need to get into the details of it. What did the administrator find? This is a screenshot. If you have used Linux systems before and used an application called HTOP, this just shows you, what's my processor doing? It doesn't look like it's doing very good right now. It's at 100%. Memory is pretty high, but not completely used up. It doesn't look good. It looks like there is a processor 2 here running with 100% CPU. Been running for about 30 seconds or 30 seconds. Obviously I was making these screenshots, so work with me here. So this is what we know. There's a process running this root. It's not doing good. But we take a look at the web application logs. These are very, very small. We'll dig into them in a bit. But the web application logs are pretty straightforward. If you ever looked at them, it tells you who's making the request, when the request was made, what kind of request they're making, and the user agent and other details like that. So you are a savvy incident responder. You take the incident logs. Unfortunately, this is not going to a SIM. It's not centrally monitored. It's not anywhere. So you get a raw copy of the logs from the administrator, and you use a Linux command line tool called awk to print out one of the important fields. In this case, this is the request field. So /text equals hello. So you can see that someone's making a request here to have the cool app say hello back to them. They're requesting the icon. That's the cool icon you see at the top whenever you load a web page in the status bar. And then we start to see something weird go on here. Text equals hello, semicolon, hello. Hello, bin echo, space or %20 hello. Because you are good at log analysis, you're able to call this out and identify this pretty quickly. This is URL encoded. This means that this is written in a way that browsers won't mess up when they read the line. So /20 or the %20 is like a space. The semicolon usually terminates a command and starts another one. And you start going through these commands that they're trying to run. So it reads the text, it ends whatever it's doing and starts a new one. So we see ID, cat groups. Someone's looking through the system, they're looking through, and they're kind of stumbling around too. It looks like they don't know where the cat program is, so they try another one. Groups, group password, group sudo words. They look in the sudo words file. They look for a tool on the system called curl. They're working through the system, they're enumerating, and they're trying to understand what it is. This is pretty clearly a security incident. It looks like someone's abusing a feature of the application to make it use some functionality that it's not supposed to typically do. So that last one stands out pretty good. And if we look, or second to last one, and we look at that, the actor found curl on the system and they run curl to pull some data down from pastebin and then output that. That's the -o flag to a sh file, 1.sh. So they are pulling down data from pastebin, they're writing it to a file on the system, and then they're going to execute that. If you look at the next line, they run bash and they execute that file. You are able to pull that stuff down to a safe box as you have a malware analysis system. Looking at that, you can see some stuff that this is the command the attacker's running. They are using curl, which is a web request utility, to pull down a tool called xmrig off GitHub and write it to a file. They use tar, which is like a package manager. So, or I'm sorry, a compressed file manager tool. It's kind of like zip. So they unzip the file and extract it to the temp folder, and then they start to run it. And they run it with some commands and a wallet IP. So a lot of stuff going on here. You don't necessarily have to know what everything is, because a lot of times in incident, you're collecting bits of information and you don't know what you're looking at. So there's going to be some things we're going to need to look into. During the identification phase, remember, we said we're going to get organized. Simple is best, but practiced is better. So if you have an organization that has like a spreadsheet that y'all use or an incident management tool or something, whatever you're using, it's important that you're good with it, that you've practiced with it, that you've prepared with it, because there's nothing worse than trying to work an incident and learn a new tool at the same time. It can be disruptive, it can be distracting. So just going with what you know is important. Like this is a very simple approach I would take to a lot of incidents where I'm writing timestamps, I'm writing actions, I'm writing information that I have, questions that I need answered, xmrig, what is that, and I break it out in the incident response process. I would literally write out the steps and start filling them in to make sure I'm going through each part of this process and handling it correctly. Whatever works for you, but simple is best, practice is better. Didn't we skip a step? Remember the preparation step? Well, that ship has already sailed for the most part. Like we play with the team that we got. So if you have the people and resources, sometimes you can add capabilities during an incident, but don't count on it. The preparation you're doing is important, and it's really going to be what you bring to the next incident that happens, or all you can rely on bringing. So what do you want to do? Like there's a bunch of stuff we can do technology-wise. There's a bunch of stuff business might let you do. Those two might be different. And that really comes back to the incident response policy and process. Like what do they allow us to do? How do we do that? And how can we execute on it? So typically you might want to do something like capture memory, take the system offline, do in-depth forensics, find the root cause and deploy a fix, and put the system back in service. All this kind of stuff that like ideally under some situations I would want to do. But that's going to conflict with what the business wants, because the business wants zero downtime, zero customer impact. They want this problem to go away. maybe they want to deploy some new features, like add some new animals that can talk or something like that before they resolve the incident. They have different priorities sometimes. Hopefully they're aligned, but not always. So there's going to be some compromise here. Then you got to think about your limitations. Technology-wise, you don't have memory capture capabilities. You don't have anyone skilled in that. Your T-shape analyst, like no one has that skill. You don't have runbooks for doing it. You don't have central logging. You can't plug into the system because it's in a data center way out there. There is an unused web application firewall and antivirus. So, that's something in your corner. And you also have very competent team members. Like that's always an asset you got to think that you have. Your team members hopefully are practiced, hopefully they're skilled. These people are on your side, and you got to use them in ways that help you respond to this. So there's lots of ways to do this. Some are better than others, but some of the steps we can take are network isolation. Can we cut the system off without shutting it off so we can, do a quicker resolution to this issue? Can we terminate vulnerable services? Probably not. Can we block the IP address? We know the attacker's coming from one IP address because we saw that in the logs. So can we block them? That's a band-aid. That's not going to help all the time, but it will certainly at least prevent that one attacker from that one IP address from continuing to exploit your application. You also have those web application firewall rules. Fortunately, someone on your team is the network expert. They can write web application firewall rules in their sleep, and they write some good ones and deploy them. You also have an antivirus expert. They're able to find that the signatures were out of date. They were able to update the signatures, apply those signatures, and find signatures that detect the particular type of software we're dealing with here. So you go in, you take those actions, you contain the incident. And this is an example of what the web application firewall rule might be. They might write something that terminates everything or rejects all requests with this semicolon in them. That might get rid of some legitimate requests, but on the most part, it's probably just going to be suspicious activity like this. And that's really a band-aid until we can get out of the containment phase and move on to eradication. So we know the incident's mostly contained. We block the attacker. Developers join the call to look at the code. Services have been restarted, so there was only like a tiny blip in service. We've got antivirus and web application firewall rules in place. So let's look at the code. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on here. Like, I'm not a Python expert, but I was able to put this together. And if you're looking at it, and if you've done some Python, you can see that this is a Flask application, a simple way to write web applications in Python. So anytime you go to the root of the application, it's going to run this function, and it's going to take whatever you give it as text. Remember, your text equals hello. So it takes that hello and plugs it in here. So the cow's going to say hello. It's going to run it with a shell and treat it as text and return that text back to you. So the answer is pretty obvious if you work with this stuff. If it's not obvious, you can actually just Google it and look it up because there's a ton of information available on this. When the attacker gives equals hello, that prints back hello, and this terminates it and starts a brand new command. So that's how they're able to do command injection into this application to execute code they should be able to execute. Like I said, there's standard ways to deal with this stuff. There's a different function you could be using that handles these arguments appropriately. So even if you try to inject a command into it, it just repeats it back as text. It doesn't interpret it, it just reads it back as text. And this is a potential solution to eradicate the problem. This is going to be a code fix that will prevent the issue from happening again. So other steps to eradicate are going to be delete the mining software, delete the script, that 1.sh. You want to delete that as well. Report the attacker to the ISP. So their internet service provider might want to know that someone on the network is attacking other people. That is a good way or sometimes that's a good way to get someone handled and taken off the network, especially if they're with like cloud providers and stuff. It doesn't always work, but it's good to do your due diligence. And basically, as far as we're concerned, the incident looks like it never happened. The updated code is pushed to production. We know the fix works, and everything's online and operational, so we can clean up and end the call. That's our recovery step. So everyone's back to work, everything's back to order, and we can all go back to sleep. So lessons learned. This is the hard part, right? This cannot become a blame game. Obviously, there were secure coding practices that weren't followed, but it's easy to point that at the dev team. But there was also other problems, like the security team wasn't updating AV. Web application firewall rules weren't updated in block mode. There weren't web application testing or a bug bounty in place that could have helped this. Like, these are all things that we can apply and update to our policies and procedures to have this stuff handled in a better way in the future. So my closing thoughts are, first, thank you for listening to me. I went through a lot really quickly, so there's obviously, if there's questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Um, I want to give you some things to think about when I end. If you're interested in blue team work and incident response work in particular, there's a lot of ways to get into it and a lot of ways to get better at it. Primarily, blue team, red team, how easy, I mean, we're all trying to keep incidents from happening. So how easy is it to report an incident in your organization? If one's reported, do the right people figure it out? And do people feel their reports matter? This is something that everyone can help out in. And obviously, with how many incidents are detected this way, it's just super important to get right. I recommend you learn and sharpen some skills. This is universally applicable, but get good at writing documentation, because you're going to be doing a lot of it. Get good at communicating with people and learn to communicate complex things simply. There's so many times where you can have a much bigger impact in an incident response effort if you're able to take a complex incident and explain, like a command injection vulnerability, to an executive or to someone who's to make those decisions in a way that lets them have the information they need at a level they're comfortable with. Like, these people are smart people. They just don't know the exact terminology and some of the terms you're using. So breaking it down in a way that they can use it is important to help them make the decision that's going to guide the incident. And also be a lighthouse in the storm. You know, if you showed up panicking in the incident, that could have been much worse. You can be calm in an incident by training, practicing, and learning constantly. Duplicate slides. And finally, learn to work with logs and text. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of software or what kind of operating system you're working on, being able to work with large amounts of logs and text is so useful. So you want to do that with relevant defensive tools. If you're in a Windows environment, PowerShell, that's a great place to start. If you're in a Mac OS or Linux environment, Python's a great place to start as far as learning to process logs and text. And if you learn one script and automation tool, you're going to look like a wizard when like this stuff happens and you need to go through a ton of data. One tool that I think is like highly overrated or highly underrated, is Excel. I've seen people do some amazing things with Excel, things that would take me longer to do by writing like code, whether it's Python or Bash. And if you can get stuff into a spreadsheet and get that process, that's in a format that's familiar to people, it's easier for people to understand, especially if you're doing stuff like pivot tables and counting and statistics in Excel. Like, that stuff is an amazing skill set. And frankly, it's just as valid and useful as like being able to write code on and run stuff in the command line. So learn something like that. That's going to get you in a really good position to handle that's really well on those fundamental skills. And with that, that's it. I think I might be under or over time, but thank you very much.
You are definitely under, so we've got some time for the questions. I actually have a question. You started off with a simple example that was a compromised account, right? So I tend to overthink things. So, when you say there's a compromised account, how do you know to stop at, hey, I make sure the multi-factor authentication is in place. I did this. How do you know, that person didn't then pivot to something else and then escalate privileges and do something else? Like, how do you know, I guess, that you haven't gone down a rabbit hole and it's not just, simply a compromised account?
Yeah, it's tough because ideally you want logs, you want evidence of like all this stuff happening, and it's really easy to prove. It's relatively easy to prove that something happened with log data. It's harder to prove that something did not happen. So, are your logs complete and 100% from every system? Are the agents turned on and setting all those logs? A lot of this stuff is like risk acceptance. How much risk am I willing to accept? Like, how much visibility do I have in my environment? And how much do I feel like I'm going to catch this activity somewhere else, right? So if an actor compromises an account and they use that account to do other things, do I have like whether it's EDR software on a system that's going to tell me that they're running other tools? Are they going to be able to evade my detections? All those kind of things. Like, how good are my detections? And this is why it's a process, right? You are preparing and you are learning lessons. Like, if you're working an incident and you have an account that you think is compromised, once you are confident based off the best information you have available, that you have contained and responded and scoped the incident, then it's time to move on to the next steps. It's easy to second guess yourself and decide to never move on to the next step through the process. But it's important to continue the incident moving along when you have the best information available for you. kind of in the back of my head, I always feel like I never know everything. The unknown unknowns, you never know what those are. But once you're reasonably confident and once you've seen enough incidents, you can decide that, like, I think I've got this handled. You're welcome to move on and continue to proceed as though you've got the incident scope correctly. One of the ways that I draw out the incident response process in other times is I will do little arrows that go backwards. So if you get to the eradication step and you start finding that the actor has compromised other accounts, you are back in the identification stage. You have not successfully completed the incident response process. And you need to go back and identify the incident and rescope and make sure you understand what you're dealing with. It's kind of like it's easier to talk about than it is to like do in practice, because our logs are not perfect. And even if you think they're perfect, you always find gaps in your logging during an incident. Like, that's like the worst time to find it, but that's usually where you find that you weren't collecting logs from a system or that would be relevant to your account. So sometimes you just got to operate with the best information available to you.
Awesome. Thank you. I actually have one more question, and then I will let everyone else ask questions. So in digital forensics, they sometimes tell you like not to cut off or not to disconnect the machine, because that, will get rid of information that might be in RAM, or, it might otherwise compromise something that's going on. So how do you know, whether to pull the plug on it to prevent it from doing anything else versus, some other action?
That really depends on, that's like a great question. That really depends on your preparation and the policy that you have. Some security policies will be so prescriptive that if a system is suspected compromised, then some things have to happen, like memory has to be examined, the disk has to be examined forensically, like all that stuff has to happen. Some policies don't go into that. And on top of that, sometimes you do not have like the processes in place for it. So I have worked incidents where there was a system that we were pretty sure we knew what was going on. We had to take it offline. We had to take some actions on it. We wanted to capture memory, but we didn't have a process in place for it. We didn't have the technology in place for it. We weren't certain of we hadn't trained on it. All that kind of stuff like comes into play. So ultimately, I made the decision that we're going to take the system offline. We're not going to capture memory. We're going to do what we can with the disk image, and we're going to do what we can with the logs available to us. Because us monitoring a system that we know an incident's happening on, where the incident is getting progressively worse, leaving it up and running in a way for us to capture memory, we just didn't have the processes and things in place for us to support that effectively. Had we, my decision would have been entirely different. Capture memory, isolate it from the network, do the things that we need to do to be able to keep it from getting worse, like still contain the incident, but still capture that memory. It really depends. That's kind of why I say, like, when you talk about incident response, there are right and wrong ways to do things, but there's a lot of gray area in between. Like, there's some answers that are definitely wrong, which is like, reimage every system in the data center when you think you got malware on one system. Like, that's probably the wrong answer. But maybe it's not under certain circumstances. Like, if you live and work in a real modern place that can rebuild and create this stuff, that have systems that are automated and rebuild, like systems that auto scale and come up, when you have outages, like, you really could burn everything to the ground and rebuild it when you think something's going on. That is technically possible in some environments. So it really depends on, like, what is your policy, what is your process, what have you practiced, what is your team, what kind of risk is your business willing to accept, and all that stuff needs to happen. Because we talk about the incident response process as like during the middle of an incident, we think we have an account or system compromise, so let's do the incident response process. But it starts way before that. Like, it starts the day you get hired and the day you start working somewhere and the day you start planning this stuff. That's really going to affect the decisions you can make later. So there's not a perfect answer to that. A lot of times it's a judgment call. I hope that answers the question. Maybe I started rambling.
Oh, no, it definitely does. I appreciate that. All right, so my lovely squad, do you guys have any questions for our friend Jaime here? All right, well, I've got one more question. Oh, please, go ahead, Jamal.
So, what would you say is the best platform where you can get some hands-on training when it comes to incident response? Because I know there are a number of different platforms out there, like Blue Team Labs and I think Immersive Lab. There are a number of online platforms. So where would you say um, would be one of the best ones where a person get some hands-on practice?
Yeah, so I am not affiliated with this group. I am not part of them, but one that I do myself is cyberdefenders.org. This place is so they have training courses, but they also have hands-on challenges. I'm working through these, and I just blog about them as I do them. So I work through these particular incidents, and then these ones. Like, I don't think I'm signed in here, but if I was signed in, you would see like the progress on the ones that I've done. I have I have blog posts that I've done on these, and I think this is like a fantastic way for you to learn and practice hands-on skills. Um, Obviously, they're a little, they're a little contrived because they have to be, they're a practice incident. But this is an example of a write-up that I did. They have a exercise called Hammered. I just kind of pick them at random, to be honest, like something that looks interesting. Um, and then I start working through it, and they give you a bunch of questions for them. And once you answer those questions, you get points. You capture together. It's a really really cool, really interactive website. Excuse me. Again, I'm not involved with them. Don't have anything to do with them, but I really like the material they put out. I really believe in it.
I would also add to that the squad, remember people who are actually involved in our squad, we have a relationship with Range Force. So we also, can use that for blue team things. If you have not checked it out, just please feel free to DM me in Slack to get access. So that brings up a question, my question. So do you actually do like tabletop exercises? We have seen like games like, backdoors and breaches. As an actual incident response person, do you do something like this at work, or is it just fun and games?
Yeah, so my previous role did a lot more of these. I am not directly involved in the tabletop process, but we have one where I am now. In my previous role, we were knocking them out maybe once a quarter or trying to. It is time consuming and it is difficult to do very consistently. I think they take a bunch of planning, they take a bunch of work. So it's hard to do one every quarter, but if you can, that is ideal. That is really nice to do. You can have people that come in as third parties that do those for you. They'll coordinate an instant response tabletop, um, and you can do them large and small too. Like those tabletops can be anything from like you get leadership involved, you get the lawyers involved, you get sysadmins involved. Everyone's working together doing a tabletop. Those take a long time to plan. They take a long time to do. The other thing that we would do at my previous role is we would have lunch and learn Fridays. Like it was just every Friday we would get together and we would pick some exercise and do something. Um, One of the places we would do them a lot is malware traffic analysis. It is a website that posts PCAPs, it posts malware samples, it posts other things, and they work through incidents. They give you questions. There's like exercises you can work through, and we would just work through that stuff together. And I always found those are very small scale. They take very little preparation, but man, that was effective for like it's so good to like get your team working together and teaming up on something and working together as opposed to like if you're working in a job, you tend to go off in your separate ways sometimes, come back together, work incidents. But this is just a great way for people to like team up and do exercises together, and they take no preparation at all. You could even do some of these cyber defender ones and go through and work them as a team. But those are effective tabletops in a way. You're not tabletopping an actual incident at your job, but you're certainly working through some important skills. You're working through some technical steps that you need. You are communicating and walking through the process. Um, and all that stuff is super important for being prepared. So tabletops large and small, I, you don't have to make them big and elaborate every time to get value out of
Awesome, thank you. Do you have I guess, a version of like a chaos monkey in incident response? Is that something that exists, I guess, from the IR perspective?
So I've seen them, but I've never used one in production or used one in the team. Like one of the best ways to do that stuff is have like an internal red team or an internal testing team. Can you catch them when they're actually doing exercises and work? If you can, that is a great example of like getting your incident response detection processes working. And when you detect them, can you handle them like a real incident? Like how would you shut them down? What process would you follow? So having people do that is great. There's not a lot that I can think that like simulates that activity the way that people do, but I'm sure there's something out there it's not really something that I've specialized in trying to figure out. So I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately. But um,
Cool.
working with the offensive people is as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think that, offense and defense need to work well together in order to be able to, really get anything. I think that's probably one of the common misconceptions is that people that assume that, the red team and the blue team are basically on opposite teams, like, but in reality, I think in cybersecurity, it's, you really have to work together. So you're really just, maybe scrimmaging. If
Yeah.
that makes sense, as opposed to, playing another team. All right. So do we have any other questions for our guest?
Yes, I have one question. Okay, so I know that you mentioned, how the IT support team could be a part of the incident response phase, and it seems as if like everybody plays a role or a part in it in some sort of way. Um, and me being a former help desk, I know that, I've seen things where if, a user were interacting from a blacklisted country that we would get a message through email or via email about it. But in regards to, I guess, both, I guess, IT help desk and knock positions, is there any advice that you can give in regards to, I guess, trying to hone our skills while being in those roles? In terms of like learning the company's run books and things of that nature. Is there any advice that you can give?
Yeah, so that's exactly where I came from. I was working at Network Operations Center. I moved up to the Network Operations Center, and then joined the security team in a junior role when I first joined a security team. You are like the eyes and ears of the company, and I think you have visibility and stuff in a way that a lot of other people don't. And you have the opportunity to fix things that other people don't necessarily have the time to fix or the interest in fixing. So like um, someone that I follow on Twitter, and I probably spend too much time on there, but Swift on security, like I love the way that that account talks about the help desk responsibility in an organization, the way that the help desk has like unique capabilities in an organization. I think that mindset is a good way to approach it. When I joined the security team, the reason I joined them was because we had these audits that we would go through every year, and there were manual Active Directory audits that we had to do. Who are the administrators in a group, who are the ones who can take whatever actions that the auditors want to know about. So helping them out and doing that with them, that gave me eyes into Active Directory. That gave me an ear with the security team. So when a position opened up and I applied for it, they already knew who I was, they knew what I was doing, they knew how I worked, and it was a much easier fix for me to get in, it was like a much easier way for me to get in to the security industry than it would have been otherwise. So being available, helping out when you can, making yourself available for that stuff. It's tough because it's like extra work sometimes, but it really paid off in my example. I think. On top of that, just knowing how the environment works, um, and being able to help out with that stuff, I think it is huge. Um, I said that I think everyone's on the instant response team, and I say that because I really believe it. Um, it's tough to have the instant response team try to do everything on their own and try to make changes on their own and coordinate an incident together. A lot of organizations support these teams differently. So maybe they're going to have incident responders and incident handlers. People are just handling the phones, taking the timeline, doing the scribe work, that kind of stuff. And then they have technical people that are actually making the changes, doing queries of user accounts. I think all that stuff is skills that you can be using from your position or from a position in an operations center to get up into security and like learn those appropriate skills. Like I personally think that operations center people are excellent hires into like a SOC or into a security role just because they know so much about how the organization works, and they see where the processes that are documented diverge into the practices that people follow, and they know where all the skeletons in the closet are because maybe they put some there or whatever. But having that visibility is something that like an outsider coming in just doesn't have. um, I hope that answers your question. Make
Yes.
yourself available, take up extra work that helps that team if you can, and use your visibility in a way that that helps the incident response process.
Thank you.
And I can't reinforce how amazing that advice is. I tell people all the time, some people view it I get paid to do X, Y, Z, and they'll say, hey, something is not in my job. And I think that that's the wrong way to go about it, especially if you're trying to pivot and, for further your career. Take as much extra activities, anything that they will give you access to they will let you get involved in. I would recommend that you get involved in that, because not only can you then use that information on your resume, but then you can use that to, make the business case for why you'd be excellent for that pivot into, the SOC or out of the knock or whatever, it is that you're trying to do. But it also gives you additional skills that you wouldn't have if you just did, the XYZ that you got hired to do. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question.
Wait,
I want us to.
Can I ask that question? Thanks, Jaime, for your time. I have a question about the part lessons learned. What do you think? What's your experience with incorporating those lessons learned in the procedure, in operational procedure? I guess I'm also very interested in the gap between the IT and the non-IT people. What is your experience so far?
My experience is that it's hard. When an incident happens, everyone's eyes are on it, and everyone's very interested in fixing that problem and getting things resolved and getting things changed. There's a phrase that I've heard so many people that I respect that don't know each other use, which is, you never waste an incident. If an incident happens, there is, struck while the iron's hot. People are interested in getting this stuff fixed. So taking the lessons learned and being able to apply those very quickly, whether it's a user audit, adding technology, changing something, when an incident is fresh in everyone's mind, that's the time to do it. When an incident is no longer fresh in someone's mind, or something else has happened and people aren't thinking about that anymore, it's harder when you lose that momentum. So I think that's one of the big problems. That's the reasons why lessons learned is so hard to apply, at least in my experience. It's easy to get that stuff put on the back burner when it's not front and center in everyone's head. The time it's front and center in everyone's head is when an incident has just happened. But so much stuff happens in everywhere, whether it's production, unrelated security incidents, whether it's an audit that's going on or other work that has to happen, whatever. There's just a ton of ways to get distracted from what needs to be done. And if you don't take advantage and get those lessons learned applied immediately, that's when it becomes really hard to have them done. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
All right. It is 12:58. I want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's lunchtime. Jaime, I want to thank you so much for coming out. This has been very informative for me. And I hope that everybody else found it as valuable as I did. I would definitely recommend that everybody check out the cyberdefenders.org website, so that you can check out those activities, especially if you're interested in blue team things. And I would also say, make sure that you're following Jaime on all of the things. I follow him on Twitter, remote phone. And is there any other websites or anything that you want to promote, Jaime?
I have a blog that's linked in my Twitter. It's where I post some of the write-ups that I do and some other things. And my Instagram is just bird pictures. That would not be interesting. It's whatever. That's just for me.
Awesome. So definitely check out his blog. The link is in his Twitter bio. And if you like birds, check out his Instagram as well. We like to support each other around here. So Jaime, thank you so much for coming out and spending your lunch hour with us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you all.